And I am with Savage Tim. Savage Tim, it's been a while. How in the world has your gaming been going, man?
It's been going fairly good. Like I said, as is always, the weather in Buffalo is always sort of touch and go. Especially this time of the year with various types of snow and cold and people getting ill for one thing or another, which is pretty much par for the course around this time of season. But things are kind of picking back up again. Hopefully, the schedule will clear up a little bit more in the near future. We're still doing our Savage Sunday events. We just got done with our February one this past Sunday.
How did it go?
Um, Went very well. We had a couple of very large tables. We had a new GM, Ben, who ran a very large and extremely silly Necessary Evil game. And I got to run a little bit of Deadlands for a bunch of folks and had a couple of new players at the table who I hadn't played with before. So we did get a chance to kind of hang out and talk shop and do what we wanted to do. So it was very good times. It's also nice to be at Dragon Snack now because Dean has taken the opportunity to move some stuff around, and so we have a little bit more breathing space,
Hmm.
which is always nice to have. So now he moved most of the open game area from the back of the store up to the front, so you have a little bit more room up there, and also you're nice and closer to the bathrooms, which is also helpful.
Oh, nice. Did you do any? We were talking last time a possibility of doing in between session or during a slot of doing a seminars about GMing and things like that. Were there any good discussions that broke out, or were it spontaneous seminars about GMing Savage Worlds? Did any of that go down?
Now, we talked a little bit about upcoming plans for the next few months, about a couple of conventions that are coming up towards the end of the month and over the course of the next few months. We've got SimCons coming up at the end of March, which takes place on the University of Rochester. A couple weeks after that, we're going to have UBCon happening up at University of Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're already starting to kind of lay out some beginning groundwork for plans for Queen City Conquest, which is going to be in September right here in Buffalo. So it's a little further down the road, but we've got a couple of pitches for ideas for games that might happen.
Ooh. Any more Epic games?
Well, we should talk about that at some point. I got a few ideas,
Cool.
but I don't want to really kind of spoil them too early. So let's keep that
I
a
thought
secret for the time being.
you and some other people had talked. Hey, I like to sometimes be the player in the game too.
Mm-hmm. I have a little bit of news, but I'm not sure I'm available to talk about it just yet. So we're going to keep
Okay.
that quiet for now.
All right, we'll keep it on there. So the big thing, the from when this podcast is coming out, they had just wrapped up their Weird War One settings, and
Yep.
I've been wanting to get in Mike's Weird War Endor game, but that's
Oh
really
yes.
all I know about Weird War. Is
Okay.
this like Deadlands going into World War Two and stuff? What is Weird War comparatively?
Well, the Weird War setting is a bit divorced from Deadlands. It's more of an alternate. It's another kind of alternate history, or more of a secret history style game, where unusual things are happening behind the scenes of our own history. So the original version of Weird Wars was done for Weird War Two. He did a D20 version towards the end of the D20 boom back in the early 2000s. And wow, we can say that now, early 2000s. That just sounds so weird to my elderly ears. Um, and it was a fairly interesting book, but kind of suffered a little bit because the D20 rules didn't really work very well for the type of unit based and squadron based and squad based, unit based, or battalion level combat.
Mm.
So that was actually one of the reasons why Savage Worlds was converted to being a role playing system, is because it worked much better for that sort of thing. So kind of the history of Weird Wars is also tied into the history of Savage Worlds. So the first one they did for Savage Worlds was called Tour of Darkness, which was set in Vietnam, which had some really terrific stuff in it and was really kind of dark and a creepy one. The idea is that to kind of give a little bit of history, is that the Weird War setting is a world very much like our own, but there are things out there in the night that thrive on conflict, thrive on war and death and destruction, and go to these sorts of places and feed off the energy it generates. A really good example is if you watched Heavy Metal. The one sequence with the bomber is a perfect example of what a Weird War book is going to look like. There's also a long comic series from was it not Epic? Oh no, I've forgotten. Same people who did tour Tales from the Dark Side, or Tales from the Crypt. Oh, EC Comics.
Hmm.
EC Comics also did a long Weird War comic series, which had those sorts of stories in it. And so you wind up running into not only the enemy in the game, but you also run into vampires and werewolves and other strange monsters and creatures from lore and history. So you get Weird War 2, which has been done for D20. You get Tour of Darkness, which was done for Savage Worlds. And then a few years ago, we got Weird War 2, which was an update of the original Weird Wars line to the Savage Worlds rule set. And that was followed by Weird Wars Rome, which took place during the Roman occupation of Britannia, back around the early, around the year 0 BC, AC. It was doing that changeover. And then finally, this year now we're getting Weird War 1, which takes place in the Weird Wars to End All Wars time period. I think it's kind of interesting because it's definitely a time where not a whole lot of games take place. So,
We were saying, I was telling you earlier that over the weekend my Sunday gaming group was
mhm.
talking about Tolkien. Did he understand warfare and stuff? And my wife able to pull out the quotes from him from serving in World War I, saying that he had all but like one of his friends were killed in the war,
Mhm.
and that an entire generation was lost in that battle. Uh, I mean, this is going to be a very, very dark game, I assume.
Oh,
And
absolutely, yeah.
how does the Savage World give itself to something so heavy and serious, or does the weirdness take the edge off of that?
I think the weirdness helps take a little bit of the edge off it. I mean, obviously, it's still going to be a pretty brutal game. Typically, most of the Weird War settings use use the gritty damage rules. So when you get hit, it hurts a lot. Um, I had actually instituted a rule in when I ran to our darkness. I had a house rule where if you took a permanent injury, you were discharged. You were honorably discharged and given a Purple Heart and sent home because that's what would have happened. Is if you had an
Mm-hmm.
injury, you're no longer in fighting for them. They don't keep you around. The idea being that the players would then have to come up with a reason to keep that player's character around. Um, so yeah, it's definitely going to be a lot darker, especially for that time period. When you're looking at the First World War, you're talking about the first mechanized war, large scale warfare to happen in the West. So you're seeing people interacting with a number of weapons and fighting techniques that no one had ever done before, that no one had ever seen before. And a lot of people came back brutally injured and bloody. People came back with horrific injuries. The survivors were in a terrible, terrible state. It doesn't take long for you to kind of see that that would really be something very harrowing for a player group to have to go through. So it's kind of telling that I think the last time I heard of anybody making a Weird War One game, it was for Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, as I was thinking, because thinking very similar to Octung and
Hmm.
Cubicle 7 put together a Cthulhu World War II thing,
Right.
and it seems to be a hot area to focus on.
Hmm.
And we'll move into a little bit nicer things. How is your East Texas University game going?
Pretty good. We've actually broken through seasoned. Yay, at long last. Yay, they're past seasoned. Yeah. Um, and I think the last time we talked, they had just encountered the Chupacabra. Now they're in the midst of an investigation into some poltergeist activities in one of the buildings on campus. Um, but they also have come to discover that there may be a family connection between one of the players and some other history of East Texas University.
Cool.
So we'll have to see how long it's going to take them to figure out what the story is with that.
Cool. So I have about 6 or 7 players in my group now, and they
Yikes.
are all really good role players. And half the time, I don't feel like I'm needed there. They are having a great time playing out the characters and stuff. So I guess the question is, how much do you let them just go with it? How much do you let them have normality? Do you and versus go cutting into the beginning of the case? How
Well,
do you, what's a good rule of thumb for that with East Texas?
I think one of the things that I kind of go off of, just not even just for East Texas University, but for games in general, is that the players are talking to each other and they're talking character and they're having a good time. There's no reason to interrupt that. That's kind of what you're there for. They're going to set their own pace. They're going to set their own level of involvement in what the activities are going on. So you don't really need to kind of enforce plot on top of them if they're not looking for plot. Um, Obviously, what you want to do is pay attention and look for moments where they have a break in their action or a break in their conversation that you can then lead them into the next scene or lead them to the next portion. It can be a little tricky to kind of to do exactly that, but if you pay attention to how they're phrasing things and how their individual conversation is going, it's not that challenging.
And do you let them have a period, days of normality, days of
Oh,
playing
absolutely.
out their lives and their activities and their relationships before cutting over to another thing? And how do you cut, because there's only supposed to be like so many cases per semester and things? How do you
Mhm.
balance this out and play the time tricks?
Well, if you think of it as like cutting together a movie scene, is that just when things start to get interesting is when you're going to cut away to another perspective. So when someone's interacting with someone in a classroom, say, and they discover that the person let something fall out of their person, oh my gosh, it's a voodoo doll. What's up with that? That's the point where we're going to cut to another person, have them start doing what they want to do. That way, the original character, the original player, is just waiting for you to cut back to them to find out what's going to happen next to them and their character. Um, so it's just a matter of keeping an eye on your pace and keeping an eye on where the players are interested in focusing their attention, and just kind of following along with them and building up wherever they're heading to.
How many balls do you keep in the air at the same time? Because doing that kind of thing is not like doing a one sheet
Hmm.
in there. This is like having several things going at once and choosing when you want to go to different things. How many balls do you keep in the air?
Usually between two and three. I think that any more than three, the focus is going to kind of shift too far, and then you're going to lose sight of returning back to the initial player. So, if let's say I have a group of five players, usually one person will do one thing, one person will do a second thing, and then the rest of them will kind of choose between those two about who they're going to follow along with, whether they're going to follow along or they're going to do their own thing. Any more than that, you wind up fracturing your time too much and you
Hmm.
fracturing your attention too much, and then it becomes that much harder to keep track of where everybody is and what everybody's up to and what we were trying to accomplish.
Okay. And what else have you learned lately from East Texas University about how to tell the stories and how to capture that feel? What have you gotten from your experience?
I think it's definitely a place where paying attention to the characters' backgrounds and paying attention to the kind of stories that they feel like telling is a big part of it. Is that the theme of being in the college is really something that you want to kind of sell a lot. A lot of us have had that experience. A lot of people in our group have gone through that. I mean, it's kind of funny because I work that in the day job. Um, but having that kind of idea and not shying away from that is really very helpful for keeping people in character.
Cool. And so blink out. One thing I had last time I think I did Savage Sunday. I ran the Shan Fan Christmas special, and in it at the beginning we started median res with a car chase scene. It went through the docks area and then went end up onto the under construction Golden Span Bridge, which was not finished at that point. And the way that the chase was still going and it has ended up, we were ended up doing a very abrupt jump from doing the chase rules into being on the bridge and doing vehicular combat rules.
Mhm.
So, what's your advice for when to use vehicular, when to use chase? How do you transition between the two and make this seamless?
Well, usually I like using the chase rules for lots of things. I think it really shines when you have situations where it's something that you couldn't easily map on a tabletop, or it's something where it's very obviously a chase scene. The classic example of you're running away from danger, danger's trying to chase you after you. That's obviously a chase scene. Um, if you were doing something that's closer to feel to like a demolition derby, or a place where the positioning of different vehicles makes a huge difference, that's something you might want to use the vehicle rules for instead. For example, I did a conversion of the vehicle rules when I ran, or use a kind of a version of the vehicle rules when I was running 50 Fathoms. What we would do is we had the little plastic ships you used to get from the Pirates of the Spanish Main collectible trading card game. We had little versions of those, and I figured out the conversion rate to map them to the tabletop. So that way, when we had 3 or 4 ships fighting each other, I could actually have 3 or 4 ships fighting each other and have them figure out the position and angle their guns and make sure that they all have those shots lined up, rather than doing the chase rules, which would make that all very abstract. And it kept their positions very interesting. They kicked the butt out of all the bad guys, though, but that's besides the point. So it's something that definitely your players have to kind of buy into as well. The other thing that can make it challenging is that if you're dealing with a crew of people, a crew of characters, it can be very hard to keep them all involved and engaged if you're doing the tabletop combat, because it feels largely like only the pilot really has a chance to do anything.
Mm.
Now, if let's say you were to run a game where I don't know, you're playing like a bunch of you're playing like a squadron of fighters. To kind of take it back to the Weird War II stuff, one of the things you could do with that is you could do something like the Black Sheep Squadron, where all the characters are pilots and they're all involved with every combat. That's something I would probably want to map out on the tabletop. That way, everybody gets a chance to kind of push their own dude around and move to where they want to be and to make their own maneuvers and to take their own actions. That's something I would probably use the rules for more if every player is piloting their own vehicle.
But wouldn't that doesn't the chase area give it a little bit more of the 3D abstract area
It can.
take so that you don't have to worry about wait how high am I compared to this? Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
that's what I always fear about with aerial combat.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think the chase rules really do shine with that too. Um, but that's one of the things that kind of gives you a more feel in the chase rules as well, rather than doing that as regular vehicle style.
So what are the common things that people trip over in vehicular combat, or your ideas of how to keep it simple for vehicular combat?
The tricky part with that is remembering a number of the modifiers that are involved. Um, Remembering always that, well, if you're in a car and you're driving at a high speed, that's an unstable platform. So don't forget the unstable platform penalties. Also, keep in mind that speed can kill. Is that if you collide with something at high speed, you and everybody in your vehicle is taking damage. I have seen many players forget about this simple fact and wind up running their trucks or vehicles into other vehicles or standing items and forgetting that physics is a harsh mistress. You're going to go flying right through that window if you're not careful. And yes, if your vehicle is built before 1970, you don't have seatbelts.
And if
Um,
and if it's hell on earth,
and if it's hell on earth, then all the stops you can just pull out right there, because anything goes.
there,
Anything goes at that point.
there's no airbags. There's not maybe a windshield, maybe.
Exactly. If you're lucky.
Cool. And what else do you have going on in Savage Worlds in your own
Well,
games? What are you working on?
right now, like I said, I'm starting to think about what's happen later for this convention season. It looks like Savage Sunday is probably going to be a pass this month.
Mm.
Um, there's a bit of scheduling issues going on with the Sundays this month and the weekends at the store, uh, which is sad. But this is going to happen. The last time we had a skip month was in September, and it's bound to happen every once in a while. But it's the last Sunday of the month where we're normally having the event is Easter Sunday. So a lot of people have family events to go to, and a lot of people have to do their own thing. So, totally understandable. That makes sense. So we're looking at April for our next meet for that.
And it'll make
Um,
people a lot more hungry for it.
that's what I'm kind of hoping to. Yeah, is that maybe we'll get some more bodies involved as well because they'll have a little bit more time to plan on it. So that's what I'm thinking about at this point. I'm starting to kind of lay out a couple of ideas for big convention games for later this year, depending on a few other factors. I know that our buddy Dan Butch was looking for folks to help him put together some dungeon crawl type stuff. I think that'd be a cool thing to do with the Savage World rules.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if he's maybe interested in doing that with some of our stuff. And we should probably talk about what we're going to do for Savage Saturday Night this year. Last year's Big Deadlands game was such a huge hit. I can't. I want to see if we can top ourselves.
I think we can find a way, and there's plenty of material to work with.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you, Tim, and we will talk to you again next month.
Okay, sounds great.
And stop broadcast.